My girlfriend uploaded a TikTok saying, "Never let a man's potential distract you from someone already winning." The same week, she left me for a luxury car salesman nearly 15 years older. I never responded publicly. Months later, she deleted every video after he vanished, owing thousands to multiple women across their city. The notification came in at 11:47 on a Tuesday night. A text from Mackenzie. No words, just a link. I was still in my work clothes, sitting on the edge of the bed with my laptop open and a half-eaten container of leftovers going cold on the nightstand. Long day. Good day. Actually, a project I'd been pushing for 6 months had finally cleared the last internal approval, and I'd spent the evening running numbers, making plans, feeling like something was quietly clicking into place. Then the link. I clicked it without thinking much of it. Muscle memory. We'd been sending each other things online for 3 years. Funny videos, news articles, random clips at midnight. So I clicked it the same way I always did, expecting nothing. It was a TikTok. Hers. The caption read, "Never let a man's potential distract you from someone already winning." The video was maybe 40 seconds long. It opened on her, Mackenzie, looking polished, laughing at something off camera, her hair done the way she only did it when she wanted to be seen. Then the camera panned. A parking lot. A dealership, glass-fronted and gleaming under white lights. And standing beside a dark Mercedes, one hand resting on the hood with the casual ease of a man who owns rooms he walks into, was someone I didn't recognize. Older, maybe early 40s. A watch that caught the light deliberately. A jacket that cost more than my first paycheck. He didn't look at the camera. He didn't need to. Mackenzie looked at him like he was a window she'd been pressing her face against for years and had finally been let inside. The text overlay faded in slowly. White font. Clean. Upgrade SCN. No apologies. I set the phone down. Picked it up again. Watched it a second time. The comments had already started stacking. 47 of them in the first hour. I scrolled through without meaning to. The way you slow down near an accident even when you don't want to look. Girl, yes, finally someone who gets it. He's literally so fine, OMG. Wait, is this the same guy from before? Massive W. LMAO, she really said potential is for savings accounts, not boyfriends. And then, tagged, mutual friends. People whose numbers were still in my phone. People I'd had dinner with, whose birthdays I remembered, who had sat across from me at tables and laughed, and asked how things were going with that project. Man, sounds like you're killing it. At Madison RVH, OMG, she finally did it. At Chase Sondrum crying, she said what she said. 3 years. I locked my phone and set it face down on the nightstand. Turned off the lamp. Lay flat on my back in the dark and stared at the ceiling. I didn't text her back. I didn't comment. I didn't screenshot it to send to anyone with a string of question marks. I just lay there, in the quiet, feeling something settle in my chest that I couldn't quite name. Not rage. Not humiliation, though both of those were there if I'd wanted to reach for them. It was something slower and heavier, like the feeling you get when you've just been told something you already knew and had simply been choosing not to look at. The comment that kept surfacing behind my eyes wasn't the cruelest one. It was the most casual one. Upgrade SCN. Like I was a phone she'd been holding on to past its usefulness. Like 3 years had a return policy. I should have been angry. Instead, I felt something much worse. By the time I got to the office, it had already spread. That's the thing nobody tells you about social media humiliation. It doesn't wait for you to be ready. It doesn't give you a morning to collect yourself, drink your coffee, figure out what you're going to say. It moves on its own clock, and everyone else's timeline is already hours ahead of yours before you've even tied your shoes. Dalton texted me at 7:14 a.m. Bro, you good? 2 words. The kind that carry weight precisely because they're trying not to. Dalton had been my closest friend since college. The kind of person who knew how to ask without asking. Who understood that you good sometimes meant I already know you're not, and I'm here when you want to talk about it. I texted back. Yeah, working. We'll talk later. I didn't talk to him later. Not that day. Chase called around noon. I let it go to voicemail, then felt guilty and called him back in the parking lot during lunch. I just wanted to make sure you saw it, he said, which was his way of saying everyone saw it. I saw it. Are you gonna? Do you wanna? No, I said. A pause. Okay. I'm good, Chase. Really. I wasn't entirely good, but I also wasn't falling apart, and that distinction felt important to hold on to. The video hit 4,000 views by that evening. Then 8. I know because Brooke sent me a screenshot of Mackenzie's profile. Not maliciously, I think. just because she genuinely didn't know what else to do with what she was witnessing. Brooke had been friends with both of us, one of those people in every relationship who exists in the overlap of the Venn diagram and hopes nobody makes her choose a side. The screenshot showed the view count. It also showed a comment thread where someone I'd met twice at a birthday party had written, "Honestly, she deserves better. She's been patient long enough." Patient. Like I'd been some ongoing project she'd been managing. Like 3 years of building something together was a sentence she'd been serving. I closed the screenshot. Didn't respond to Brooke. At work, I kept my head down. The project was still there. The numbers still needed checking. The world had a way of being indifferent to your personal disasters, and on most days I found that brutal, but that week I found it useful. I had somewhere to put my attention that wasn't my own chest. The harder part was my family. My mother called on Thursday. She'd seen it. Someone had sent it to her. One of those chain reactions of well-meaning interference that families specialize in. And she was careful and quiet and said all the right things, which somehow made it worse. She asked if I wanted to come home for the weekend. I said no. She said okay, and then she said, "You don't have to explain anything to anyone." And I knew she meant it as comfort, but it landed sideways because the problem was that I wanted to explain, not to the internet, not to Mackenzie, but to myself. What did I miss? What did I not see? How long had she been comparing? I almost responded to the video. I want to be honest about that. There was a version of that Thursday night where I opened my phone, typed something measured and devastating and perfectly calm, and posted it. I thought about it for maybe 40 minutes. I wrote a draft in my notes app, not angry, just clear, just factual. The kind of thing that would have gotten reshared and dissected and turned into its own news cycle. Then I deleted it. Not because I didn't have anything to say, because I understood, somewhere underneath the noise, that saying it publicly would make me feel better for about 6 hours and worse for considerably longer. I'd seen enough comment sections to know that defending yourself on the internet is like trying to put out a fire with a slightly smaller fire. It doesn't go out. It just spreads differently. So I closed the app. I didn't realize it then, but that moment, the choice to stay quiet, changed everything. Because what I thought was the worst part hadn't even happened yet. If you enjoy real stories like this, subscribe, because what happened next changed everything for me. 3 years is long enough to stop noticing someone clearly. That sounds harsh. I don't mean it that way. I mean that when you're inside something, really inside it, living with someone, building routines with someone, making plans, you stop being a good observer. You stop watching. You trust the peripheral instead. Mackenzie and I met when we were 24. She was sharp and funny and had this way of noticing things in a room that most people walked past. We were together for 3 years almost exactly, and for most of the first 2 of those years, I was happy in a way that felt real and earned rather than performed. We had an apartment. We had routines. We had a shared future that existed in specific terms, a city we talked about moving to, a rough timeline for things we both wanted, conversations about what kind of life we were trying to build. I was working hard, not in a dramatic, sacrificing everything way, just in the way that most people in their mid-20s work when they're trying to actually get somewhere. Long hours, a lot of learning, the occasional stretch where the apartment was quiet because I was at the office until 9. I wasn't neglectful. I was building towards something, and I thought she understood that because we'd talked about it, because we'd made plans together that required it. What I missed, or chose not to examine too closely, was when the building started to feel like waiting to her. The shift happened gradually enough that I didn't catch it in real time. She started spending more time on her phone. Not unusual, but the specific quality of it changed. She was watching different things, following different accounts, becoming interested in a particular aesthetics of life that hadn't been there before. Luxury travel content, designer unboxings, couples whose entire visible relationship existed in 5-star hotels, and wardrobe reveals. She started mentioning restaurants we couldn't really afford, yet as though we simply weren't prioritizing them correctly. She started talking about other people's lives, people she followed, people she'd seen at events, people whose situations she described with a specificity that meant she'd been paying attention closely, in a way that carried a faint, persistent comparison. He just bought a new car. They went to Santorini. She said he surprised her with a reservation at. I brushed it off. We all have phases. Everyone goes through a period of wanting more, feeling restless, measuring themselves against some imaginary standard. But there was one thing she said, somewhere in the back half of that 3rd year, that I didn't understand at the time. We were getting ready to go somewhere. A dinner, I think, something ordinary, And she looked at herself in the mirror for a long moment and then said, almost to herself, I don't want to live like we're still getting there. I want to already be there. I thought it was about the apartment, about the city we'd talked about moving to, about normal impatience. I kept getting ready. I didn't ask her what she meant by there. His name came up for the first time in late October. Mackenzie mentioned it the way you mention a coworker, casually, as context for a story about something else. She'd been at a dealership with her friend, looking at a car she was considering, and she'd been helped by this salesman. Bryce. Very knowledgeable, she said. Very professional. Took his time, didn't rush her. I registered it the way I'd register any name. Filed it, forgot it. Then he came up again the following week. A funny thing he'd said. A detail about the dealership. Then again, something about a car he'd told her to look into. A specific model she was now researching. I noticed the repetition before I noticed the significance of it. Just a frequency thing. The way you realize you've heard a word 3 times in a week and suddenly it's everywhere. Bryce. Bryce said. Bryce thinks. Did I tell you what Bryce told me about? I asked once lightly. How many times have you been back to this dealership? She smiled the way people smile when they're deciding how to answer. Just following up on the car. The car she never bought. Bryce was 42. I found this out later, pieced together from things she mentioned over the following weeks as the references became less casual and more deliberate. He was older. He wore a specific brand of watch that she described in enough detail to have looked it up. He drove something German. He had, apparently, been to several places she'd been wanting to go. I want to be fair to myself here. I didn't panic. I didn't go through her phone. I didn't accuse her of anything or manufacture a confrontation out of a suspicion that was still mostly just a feeling. What I did was watch, and what I watched was a set of behaviors that, in retrospect, had a very clear logic to them, even if I wasn't willing to name the logic at the time. She started taking longer to respond to texts. Not always, just sometimes. And the pattern of the delays was specific, present on evenings, present on weekends, absent during the day when she would have been at work. She started angling her phone away when she was reading something. Small lies appeared. Minor ones. The kind that only register as lies when you line them up later. A story about her evening that didn't quite match a detail she'd mentioned earlier. A location she mentioned offhand that wasn't where she'd said she'd be. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that constituted evidence. Just friction. Tiny contradictions that smoothed themselves out if you didn't press on them. The emotional distance was harder to describe because it didn't arrive all at once. It was more like a lowering of temperature. Conversations that used to flow became exchanges. Evenings that used to feel shared started feeling adjacent. She was present in the apartment, but somewhere else in her attention, and when I reached toward the warmth I'd always known was there, it wasn't exactly cold, just less. I told myself it was a rough patch. Told myself it was stress. Told myself, with the particular stubbornness of someone who has invested 3 years and doesn't want to believe the investment is over, that things had been off before and come back, and this would too. I was wrong about all of it. The breakup happened less than 2 weeks later. She called it a conversation. That's the word she used when she asked if we could talk. Can we have a conversation? And I think she chose it deliberately, because conversation sounds mutual, sounds like two people with equal things to say, sounds less like what it actually was. I was calm going into it. I don't know if that was dignity or numbness or just the peculiar stillness that descends when you already know the shape of what's coming and have spent 2 weeks quietly preparing for it without acknowledging that's what you're doing. We sat in the living room. Our living room. The one with the rug we'd picked out together and the lamp she'd found at a market in the spring and dragged back on the train, laughing, saying it was absolutely worth the trouble. I remember noticing the lamp specifically that night, thinking about the train. She said she'd been doing a lot of thinking. She said she needed to be honest with me. She said she had a lot of love for me, so much love, but that she needed something different right now. Something more certain. Something she didn't have to wait for. I asked her what she meant by certain. She told me, carefully and with the vocabulary of someone who had rehearsed this, that she felt like she'd spent 3 years living in a version of our life that was always a few steps ahead of where we actually were. That she wanted someone who was already there, already established, already successful. I offered quietly. She didn't say yes. She also didn't say no. She talked about Bryce without saying his name for the first half of it, which was its own kind of thing. He was older, she said, more stable. He had a certain confidence that came from having already figured things out. He wasn't still becoming something. He was already something. I sat with that. Do you think I'm not successful? I asked. Not defensively. Genuinely. I wanted to understand the specific measurement being used. She chose her words. "I think you have a lot of potential," she said. "I think you're going to do really well." She meant it as a compliment. I could tell she meant it as a compliment. It landed like a door closing. Potential. The same word the TikTok would use in 72 hours. I'd hear it again. That word, stripped of its kindness and made into a punchline. And I'd think back to this couch and the lamp from the market and the very careful way she delivered it, like a verdict dressed in warmth. She said she hoped we could handle this with maturity. She said she didn't want things to be ugly. I told her I agreed. She waited, I think, for something else. For the emotion she'd prepared for. The argument, the bargaining, the scene that would give the night a different kind of weight. I'd seen it in her posture when I came in, a bracing, a readiness. I didn't give it to her. I said okay. I said I needed some time to sort out my things. I said I hoped she found what she was looking for. And I meant it. Not bitterly. Just truly. She looked at me for a moment like she wasn't sure what to do with that, and then she nodded. And then we talked quietly about logistics. And then I drove to Dalton's apartment and sat on his couch until 2 in the morning not saying very much. And he didn't push, and I was grateful. 3 days later, the TikTok went up. That should have been the end of the story. It wasn't. December came. Then January. I moved into a smaller apartment. Intentionally smaller, intentionally simpler. The kind of place that's easy to keep clean and quiet and functional. No rug we'd picked out together. No lamp from any market. Just space and light and the low, consistent hum of a life I was rebuilding from first principles. I want to be clear about how this part went, because I've seen the version of this story where the protagonist throws himself into some dramatic reinvention, the training montage, the revenge glow-up, the deliberate and documented transformation. That wasn't what happened. What happened was quieter and, I think, more real. I just kept working. The project I'd been developing cleared its next milestone in January. By February, I'd been brought into a higher-level conversation about the direction of the division. By March, an opportunity appeared that I'd been positioning toward for over a year. Not handed to me, not accelerated by anything dramatic, just arrived in its natural time because I'd been doing the work consistently and the work had been building. I started running again. Not because a breakup made me want to reinvent myself, but because I'd stopped for almost 2 years in the way that busy people stop things, and I missed it. I was sleeping better, thinking more clearly. There was a particular quality of mornings that I hadn't had in a long time. A feeling of the day being mine before anything else claimed it. Dalton and I grabbed food most weeks. Chase and I started playing basketball on Sunday mornings, something we'd been meaning to do since before I could remember. Brooke texted occasionally, and I texted back. Small things. Steady things. The texture of a life that was genuinely okay. I wasn't happy in a shiny way. I was okay in the way that's better than happy, stable, functional, facing forward. Meanwhile, Mackenzie was living loudly. I wasn't following her. I want to be precise about that. But when you have mutual friends, and those friends are still connected to someone's life online, information travels without any effort on your part. I caught glimpses without looking for them. A trip posted on a story someone reshared, a restaurant tagged in a photo that surfaced in a feed, the evidence of a life being packaged and displayed with considerable effort and attention. The posts were beautiful. That's not sarcasm. They had the high production quality of someone who understood the algorithm and was committed to it. Soft lighting, the right angles, the curated evidence of a relationship that looked like an advertisement for aspiration. Bryce appeared in them with the ease of a man who was used to being photographed, always slightly away from the camera, always in context of something expensive, always confirming the aesthetic without over-explaining it. She seemed, by every visible metric, to be exactly where she'd told me she wanted to be. I told myself I didn't care, and most of the time I believed myself. But somewhere around April, the posts started changing in a way I couldn't exactly name. The volume dropped first, from almost daily to a few times a week to something more sporadic. Then the comments were turned off on a few of them, which was unusual for someone whose engagement had always been part of the point. Then there was a stretch of about 10 days with no posts at all, which given the previous pattern was noticeable enough that even Brooke mentioned it in passing. Have you seen Mackenzie's page lately? She's been quiet. I said I hadn't been paying attention, which was almost true. Something wasn't adding up. I could feel the arithmetic of it without seeing the numbers. Something underneath the surface that didn't match the image, a wobble in a structure that had been presenting as solid. I wasn't looking for it. I wasn't tracking it. I wasn't hoping for anything in particular. And then Dalton called me. He called on a Wednesday evening, which was unusual. Dalton was a texter, not a caller, the kind of person who would spend 5 minutes crafting a message rather than use 30 seconds of voice. When his name appeared on my screen as a call, I picked up immediately. "Hey," I said. "Everything okay?" Yeah, I'm good." He paused. "I need to tell you something, and I don't know how you're going to take it, so I'm just going to say it." "Go ahead." What he told me took about 15 minutes to get through, not because it was complicated, but because the details kept multiplying in a way that required him to keep stopping and saying, "And then there's this part." Dalton had a friend, a woman named Simone, someone he'd known through work, who had been seeing Bryce. Not recently. She'd been seeing him around the same time Mackenzie had appeared on his radar. They'd overlapped, apparently, in a significant and deliberate way, and Simone had recently discovered this in the manner of someone finding out through a shared acquaintance who knew both parties. She'd started asking questions. She'd started finding answers. Simone was not the only woman. I sat down, not dramatically, just because standing seemed unnecessary for what was about to take a while. There was a woman named Courtney who had been seeing him since the previous summer. There was another woman, Dalton didn't know her name, just that she existed, who had apparently been involved for over a year. The timeline, as Dalton understood it from Simone, didn't make any of these relationships incidental or overlapping by accident. They were concurrent. They were managed. They were maintained with the particular skill of someone who had been doing this long enough to develop systems. "There's more," Dalton said. "The money." This was the part that arrived in pieces, each one slightly worse than the last. Bryce had borrowed money from Simone, not a small amount, framed as a short-term thing for a business situation he described as temporary and resolvable. Simone had given it to him because they were close and she trusted him, and he'd been credible about the circumstances. Courtney, as it turned out, had a similar story. Different amount, different framing, same structure, an urgent need, a specific reason, a promise of return, and then a gradual accumulation of excuses that grew softer and more elaborate over time until the calls started going to voicemail. There were questions now about the dealership. Dalton didn't know the specifics, just that someone who worked there had mentioned that Bryce's situation was, to use the word Dalton passed along, complicated. Whether that meant he was behind on something, leveraged on something, entangled in something, the picture wasn't clear yet. But the picture was getting clearer. I asked, because I had to, "Does Mackenzie know?" Dalton was quiet for a moment. "That's the thing," he said. "I don't know what she knows. But someone told me she lent him money too." I didn't say anything to that. "Not a crazy amount," he added. "But not nothing." I stayed on the phone with Dalton for a while after that, mostly listening. He filled in more details as he knew them, and I absorbed them without the satisfaction I'd maybe expected to feel, because it turned out the truth didn't feel satisfying at all. It just felt sad. Not for him. Bryce had made his choices with considerable intent, but for the women who trusted the image. For Mackenzie, who had rearranged her life around someone she believed was already somewhere, already something, already the finished version of a person rather than a very polished performance of one. The watch, I thought. The jacket. The casual hand on the hood of the car. Someone already winning. What nobody tells you about people who perform success is how much energy they dedicate to the performance. It takes real work to maintain the image of a life you aren't actually living. It takes attention and calibration and a constant management of what's visible versus what's true. I'd been so busy actually working that I'd never had time to perfect my image of it. Maybe that had looked, from the outside, like potential. Like not yet. Like still getting there. The next revelation came from Chase, 2 days later. He'd heard from someone in his office, a loose connection, someone who knew someone at the dealership, that there were formal complaints now. Multiple women had made contact. Bryce had stopped coming into work. His manager was dealing with calls he hadn't been told to expect. Then Brooks sent me a message. "Did you hear about Bryce?" And then, before I could respond, "This is bad." The picture was now fully assembled, even if the edges were still ragged with details I didn't have and didn't particularly need. A man had built a life out of borrowed time and borrowed money and the patient credulity of women who believed what he showed them. And the scaffolding had reached the point where it couldn't support its own weight anymore. 3 days later, Bryce disappeared. Disappeared is a specific word, and I'm using it specifically. He didn't just stop posting or go quiet the way you go quiet when you're embarrassed. He vanished in the way that people vanish when they've calculated that disappearing is better than the alternative. Phone disconnected, apartment vacated, and a set of women across the city left holding the particular combination of confusion and anger and grief that comes from realizing someone you believed in never actually existed. Simone filed a formal complaint. Courtney, apparently, was consulting someone about her options. There were others. Dalton told me the count had reached at least 4 women by the time the week was over, with the financial amounts varying but the pattern identical in every case. Mackenzie's social media went quiet first. Then it went dark. Not just dark, actively dismantled. I heard about it from Brooke, who had watched it happen in real time. First, the TikToks disappeared, one by one, then the Instagram posts, then the stories. The content she'd spent months building, the trips, the restaurants, the glowing evidence of a life she'd been presenting as proof of her choices, was gone in less than 48 hours, including, specifically, the video, the one with the caption, the one that had 4,000 views in the comments about Upgrade SEN and the casual public certainty that she'd made the right call. Gone. Mutual friends noticed. Mutual friends talked. Because that's what mutual friends do. Not cruelly, mostly, just in the way that people talk when something significant has shifted and nobody quite knows the script for it. The conversation that had been running for months, about her upgrade, about Bryce, about the confident narrative she'd been presenting, reversed itself with the quiet efficiency of a tide going out. I want to say I felt vindicated. I want to say there was a moment of satisfaction, the clean click of a thing having gone exactly the way it deserved to go. But what I actually felt was more like the absence of something. A weight I hadn't noticed carrying until it was no longer there. She messaged me on a Thursday morning, 6 months after the video. I hadn't heard from her since the breakup, not directly. Just the ambient evidence of her life online, the scraps that reached me through shared connections. And now, her name on my screen again, in that same text thread that had ended with a link and no words. The message was short. Hey, I know this is strange. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. You didn't deserve that. The video especially. I don't know what I was thinking. I read it twice. Then I set the phone down and went and made coffee and stood at the window for a while. I could have said a lot of things. I'd imagined this conversation, not obsessively, not frequently, but occasionally, in the way you rehearse things that might happen, the hypothetical version of how you'd respond when the moment arrived. I'd imagined being generous. I'd imagined being precise. I'd imagined saying something that would stick, that would carry the weight of everything the TikTok had tried to assign to me. But when I picked up the phone and typed back, what I wrote was, I appreciate you saying that. I hope you're okay. Because I meant it. Not as a performance. Not as the magnanimous response of someone playing the longer game. But because I genuinely, in that moment, hoped she was okay. She'd made choices that had cost her, and the cost had been real, and I didn't need her to suffer to feel like my own life had value. She wrote back after a few minutes. Said she was figuring things out. Said she'd been embarrassed by a lot of it. Said she'd learned something, she thought. I said that was good. I said take care. She said you too. And that was it. The whole conversation. Less than 100 words across 2 people who had shared 3 years in an apartment and a future they'd once talked about in specific terms. It was quiet and unglamorous and completely without drama. And when I set the phone down this time, it was with the feeling of something that had been sitting open finally being closed. For the first time, she wasn't trying to look impressive. Several months passed. Then a few more. The project I'd been working toward became the thing I'd hoped it would become. Not overnight. Not with any dramatic announcement, but in the accumulating way of things that were built correctly from the start, steadily, then substantially, then undeniably. I won't dress it up more than that. I did good work. The work mattered. The rest followed. I moved into a better apartment. Not to prove anything. Just because I could, and because I'd earned the stability I was standing on. I kept running in the mornings. I kept Sunday basketball with Chase. Dalton and I grabbed food and talked about things that had nothing to do with any of this, which is how you know you're actually past something, when the absence of a topic becomes unremarkable. Brooke remained a friend in the pleasant, low-maintenance way of people who have survived the awkward territory of other people's drama and come out still basically fond of each other. We didn't talk about Mackenzie. We talked about other things. I dated a little. Nothing serious yet, and I wasn't in a hurry. I'd learned something about what I wanted that I hadn't known clearly before, or maybe I'd known it and just not made it a requirement. Someone who wasn't performing. Someone who was actually present inside their own life, not managing the presentation of it. The TikTok culture that had made the video possible, that whole grammar of captions and upgrades and public declarations about your choices, had receded to its proper place in my perception of things. Background noise. The way advertising eventually becomes background noise when you stop believing it has anything to do with you. I thought about the video less and less, and then one day I realized I'd gone a week without thinking about it, and then 2 weeks, and then I stopped keeping track. There was one afternoon in late autumn, one of those clear, cold afternoons when the city looks like a photograph of itself, when I was walking back to the office after lunch and passed a dealership. Not Bryce's. Just a dealership, glass-fronted, cars arranged in the specific posture of things meant to make you want what you don't have. A salesman inside was talking to a young couple, gesturing towards something on the lot, doing the work of making the ordinary seem exceptional. I watched for a second. Then I kept walking. The last thing I heard Mackenzie had posted before she deleted everything was a quote. Something about knowing your worth, choosing yourself, the standard language of a particular type of reinvention. The quote was over a plain background, no luxury context, no visible evidence of a life, just words. A few months earlier, I would have felt something reading that. Some residual edge. This time, I just kept scrolling. And that was the last time I ever thought about her.